are the materials that we'll need to take our alginate impression. We have our alginate, we have mixing spatulas, we have our water cup, we have 2 bowls to measure our alginate and mix it in. We have a typodont that we're going to take our alginate impressions on, and then we have a maxillary tray and a mandibular tray. Notice that the maxillary includes the palate on the tray, and the mandibular has the palate cut out, so it's more of a horseshoe shape. So these are the materials that we'll need to get out in order to take our alginate impressions. So now I've filled up my water. So at this point I want to check again and make sure I have everything I need out, because once I get that water into the powder, things are going to start to move along quickly. I'm going to do my mandibular model first. Typically on a patient, we're going to start with the mandibular impression because it's a little bit easier on the patient to do mandibular as opposed to maxillary. So I'm going to go ahead and take a mandibular tray, and I'm going to do the mandibular impression first. Okay, so I have everything set up to take my maxillary impression. I've got my maxillary typodont, my maxillary tray. I've got 3 level scoops of alginate powder. I've got a water vial that's filled to the top, and I've got a spatula. So I'm going to start by taking that water, pouring it into the powder. I'm going to take my spatula and I'm going to start to slowly incorporate so I can get the powder and the water to just come together, just so that I don't make a mess. Once we've got it kind of together, I'm going to really get in there. I'm going to pick up my bowl and I'm going to start to really vigorously mix. Notice I'm kind of flipping my spatula as I go, and I'm spinning the bowl in my hand, and I'm really pressing the material on the side of the bowl. And again, this is going to give you a nice smooth consistency as well as work out bubbles. So then once I have it mixed, I'm going to use my spatula and I'm going to try to get all of it, or at least as much as I can, in one scoop on my spatula. Okay. Then I'm going to take the material and I'm going to use the spatula to fill the tray. And I'm going to make sure that it looks pretty even. Remember, we're filling it to the top of the tray. And then you don't need to have a ton of material in the palette. So sometimes I like to kind of just squish a little bit out there, just so that there's like a little bit of an indent in the palette, but we want to make sure that it is good and full. And then just like with our mandibular, I'm going to take my typodont and I'm going to kind of look from the top, and I'm going to set the tray so that it's centered. I'm going to check this front part to make sure I'm not too close to those maxillary teeth. And then once I think I'm in a good spot, I'm going to push on the distal and then push towards the mesial. So posterior to anterior, distal to mesial. And then we've got a really nice, good squish of material coming out, which is what we want. Make sure it's seated all the way. And then we're gonna give it a little bit to set up. And again, depending on how fast you're working, how cold your water is, that kind of plays a role in how long this will take to set. And you can just touch the alginate with your finger. Starting to set, but it's definitely not quite there yet. It still has a little bit of give to it. I think we're almost there. Remember, once it feels set, give it another 30 seconds to a minute, just to make sure it doesn't rip when you pull it off. And with alginate, when you're removing an alginate from a typodont or a patient, it's better to remove it quickly as opposed to slowly. Sometimes you think you can go slowly and you'll avoid issues, but with alginate, the slower you go, the more likely you are to rip it. So you want to remove it fairly quickly. So this is set, so I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to kind of brace the typodont. I'm going to go ahead and grab with my hand, kind of wrapped around the tray, and I'm going to put pressure and rock it off. Now we'll take a look at it. So you can see, again, I've got all of the teeth. I've got nice, good impression of the distal of those wisdom teeth. When I look at the gums, I've got good impression all the way around. This anterior area is an area that people tend to miss. They tend to be short in that spot. So we've got good anterior area there. And then we've got the whole palate. No big bubbles, no big issues. So that's a really nice impression for us to pour up. So now when you're done taking your impressions, you don't just leave these sitting out until you're ready to go pour them up. What you're gonna do is you're gonna take a paper towel and you're going to wet it in the sink just so that it's damp. You shouldn't be soaking wet, but just so that it's damp. And then you wrap your impression in it, and then you leave it like that until you're ready to pour it up. And that allows it so that it doesn't dry out on you, okay? So here I have a damp paper towel. You can see it's not dripping wet. And then I'm just going to wrap the impression and wrap the second one so that they're covered. And then at this point, if you're working with a patient, this is when you can help the patient get cleaned up, excuse them, get them checked out. And then once you're done and you're ready, then you'll take these into the lab and then you'll get these poured up. So that'll be our next step, is pouring these up.